Bringing a child home is a life-changing event, but when that child has crossed borders to come into a family's life, the challenges of upbringing may be insurmountable. I'm Femi Oke.
And I'm Malika Bilal. Today we'll hear from adoptees and experts on whether they think international adoption is in the best interest of children. Here's what some told the stream.
My name is Amy Mihyang Ginther. I was adopted at 3 months from South Korea.
Hi, my name is Marikel, and I was adopted from Guatemala. I was only 3 months old.
My name is Mariette, and at the age of 3, I was adopted from Haiti.
My name is Julia Sasha, and I was adopted from St. Petersburg, Russia at the age of 5.
My name is Daniel Drennan El Awar. I was born in 1963 and adopted from Lebanon to the United States.
Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Davidson. My Chinese name is Fu Dingfeng. I was adopted at age 2.5 in the Anhui province in eastern China.
Yes, there are gains, namely new relationships we form with our adoptive families and the privileges we enjoy in our adopted countries.
Adoption for me, I think, is a community.
For me, adoption is something very beautiful, but also very heartbreaking.
Adoption means I was chosen, I was wanted, I belong, and I am beloved.
We have to understand that it is a violence based in inequality.
I believe that my biological family had no choice but to give me up because they wanted me to have better opportunities in life.
So for me, adoption means acknowledging the beauty of a new family as well as the pain of losing my first family.
Thank you for sharing your adoption stories. International adoptions are on the decline. From the end of World War II until 2004, the number of international adoptions by Americans rose steadily. And in 2004, almost 23,000 children were adopted from overseas. Children arrived from China, Russia, Guatemala, South Korea, Ukraine, Colombia and Ethiopia. Over the past decade, there has been a rapid decline in many of the receiving countries, though. This may be due in part to a Hague Convention adopted by many sending countries. The treaty imposes mandatory waiting periods, residency requirements for adoptive parents, and a preference for domestic adoption.
There's also been a cultural shift in international adoptions. Adoption experts have moved from telling parents to assimilate their adopted children to encouraging them to talk openly about their adoption, racial differences, and the child's birth culture.
So to help us talk about this, from Addis Ababa, Haran Tadasser. She is an Ethiopian adoptee to the Netherlands. In Seoul, Casper Eriksson is a Korean adoptee to Denmark and a member of the Adoptee Solidarity Network in Korea.
Elizabeth Bartholet is director of the Child Advocacy Program at Harvard Law School, and Holly McGinnis is founder of Also Known As Inc., an organization to empower the voice of adult international adoptees. She's also a Korean adoptee to the United States. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, adoptees, for sharing your family pictures. It's kind of the core of our conversation. Haran, have a look here at this one. You were just a little tot here. I'm thinking maybe you're maybe 3, maybe 4 years old. When you see this family, what do you think?
There are just so many different feelings that come up. The first thing is our cultural differences. Of course, I lost my initial culture, but I'm wearing traditional clothes there. And I had to relearn my language and culture, and that's what I'm doing. That's why I'm here in Ethiopia.
What did your mum and dad tell you about your home back in Ethiopia and how you ended up being in the Netherlands? What was the story? What's your sort of birth story, your adoption story that they told you?
So the parents that adopted me, they told what they knew. So they thought I was an orphan. They were told that I was found on the street next to a dead woman, which is not true at all. And in many cases, there are a lot of lies in adoption here. So obviously I'm Black, my parents are white, so it was very clear for everybody and for me also that they were not my real biological parents.
Wow. Casper, these are your adoptive mum and dad. What do you call them? Do you have a difference between what you would call them and what you would call your birth parents?
No, not really. To me, they're just mom and dad. Those are the people I grew up with. Those are the people who took care of me when I was a kid. they are my parents. I just have, I guess, an extra set.
Yeah, as a little boy growing up in Denmark with a Korean ancestry and history, what's the one story you can tell us that illustrates the challenges of that, or maybe the joys of it? You choose.
Just one story.
We've got a show. We can come back. just start us off with a nice one, nice juicy one.
Yeah, something that's. I mean, in some aspects they kind of flow together, but it is sort of like the experience of being different to an extent. Like I'm unique, you could say I'm kind of unique compared to most English people because I'm Asian. So people will often ask me like where I'm from, stuff like that. And so like there's always this sort of sense of being special in a way, being different from most of my friends and family, which can be both good and bad. In my experience, it's been both. So.
You know, what's interesting is that we're also hearing from people who similar stories to yours, Casper, people online who are sharing their own stories. This is Haley. She says, I had a normal, happy childhood as far as the public eye would view it, but I always struggled with my identity because I'm an adoptee. Elizabeth, can you relate to this in regards to your children? Do you think that they struggled at all? And was that something that they talked about with you?
I think all children struggle with their identity, and I think there are different issues that come if you're adopted, and if you're adopted from another country, if you're growing up with a family that's of a different race and national origin. So, yeah, I don't. I definitely am not somebody who thinks that there are major sort of traumatizing psychological issues built into the idea of being adopted. I think it is a complexity in human life, but I think there are a lot of other complexities that other kids deal with. And so I've had 3 children, 1 by birth, 2 by adoption, and I'd say, you know, they've all had their identity issues. And I think, yes, there's some different kinds of issues that go with being adopted. So one of the things we dealt with was at a certain stage, one of them more than the other was interested in meeting birth family, and that's something that we were able to make happen.
There are more issues when you are adopted. I think every child, every human being will be faced with challenges in life. We start with more, I would say. Not having cleared what your name is, your nationality, not knowing your background, often about your parents, your culture. I think this is not to be underestimated because it's the start of everything that you do. Whenever you think I, if that I is not clear, it can be a hinder in everything you do.
So it sounds
and I guess I would just say that not
footing.
being adopted is often a problem in terms of identity. So I look at the kids who are in institutions and the policies that prevent those kids from being adopted, that chart that you showed at the beginning of the show. And to me, it represents tens of thousands of kids every year locked into institutions. And I think the identity problems for kids who don't have nurturing parents as they grow up are way more significant than the identity problems of growing up with a loving parent, even if that's an adoptive parent. And it doesn't mean I don't think that there are significant identity issues for adoptees. I don't want to dismiss that. I just think there are way worse things that kids go through, and among them are what happens when you don't get adopted.
Is, whether we are really dealing with orphans or not. And the problem with international adoption is that it is demand-driven. So very often, especially with children being adopted from Ethiopia, these children do not have to be in an institution. Often mothers or families, birth families, may be in a vulnerable situation for some time. They might have some financial issues for some time. With a little support there, they may be able to keep their children. But what's happening now is because international adoption is demand-driven from the West, often children are being adopted who do not really need to be adopted.
So Hiran and Elizabeth, I hear this debate right there. I
instances.
want to share with you a similar debate that's happening online. So Divan says, I'm a parent through adoption. I love everything about it. Without adoption, I wouldn't have had the chance to be a mother. I've been blessed to give my daughter a life that her biological mother wouldn't have been able to. On the other hand, though, we heard from someone who was adopted. This person says, often she gets from people the perspective that comparatively my life would have been worse if I hadn't been adopted. And that is the bar by which my life is measured. Holly, I want to bring you in here because you can see those two perspectives there. And where do you fall?
I think they're actually two distinct issues. So I think what we're talking about in terms of institutional care and the basic needs of kids are quite different and distinct from the needs of kids once they move into a permanent home for adoption. I did research while I was at the Donaldson Adoption Institute, and we conducted a national survey of adopted adults. And I often talk about theories of identity. You can think about it as layers on a cake. And yes, at the bottom level of this identity cake is the common identity issues that all people face. But without a doubt, transracial and transnational adopted people have extra layers. They have the layer of adoption identity. They have the layer of racial identity. And then for international adoptees, they have the layer of transnational identity. And so all of these pieces and layers absolutely add some complexity. That doesn't deny the fact that children who remain in institutions also have great needs. My dissertation research, which was funded by Fulbright, was looking at adolescents growing up in orphanages in Korea. And those children have an absolutely other set of needs, and that, again, what is more or worse is, I think, often relative, but I think the needs absolutely for a lot of the children in institutions are very foundational. And that's where I think the placement in a family, we know children, human development thrives best in a family, but that is also not an opportunity for the vast majority of children.
Holly,
I think
let me ask you about your experience, because you shared some pictures with us from your family. So you have Korean ancestry and you grew up in the United States. I am wondering, as we look at this picture here with your blended family, whether what you're doing now and your passion now was directly connected to how you grew up.
Absolutely. Actually, my career now is looking and researching international transracial adoption and child welfare globally. I definitely would not have expected my career to go this way. For me, adoption was something that had happened to me. It's how I got into my family. It was something that was in the past. But when I was in college, I had a lot of questions about my identity as a person who
what
had
were those questions,
Irish
Holly?
last.
Because for those of us who haven't been adopted or we're not adoptive parents, what were the questions that you really wanted to know about?
Yeah. So, I grew up really secure in my identity as a McGinnis. And often I wondered why other people looked twice and didn't understand when this little Asian girl came in that I wasn't a McGinnis. And so I had to understand how other people saw me. And I realized that people saw me as this Asian person. And so when I went to college, I thought, well, since people expect me to know everything about Asian culture, I need to major in Asian studies. But the fact is that I did not grow up in an Asian family. And so my second year, I decided I'm going to major in American studies because I want to understand how I'm an American with an Irish last name, an Asian face, and a blonde hair mom. And that, I think, is the crux of the questions that transracially adopted people have to wrangle with. And we don't necessarily have people in our families that we can go to talk about these things.
Here's another little wrinkle to this. This is Haley. She writes in, she often gets comments on how biological family members look alike or have similar mannerisms, but for adoptive kids, they lose their genetic mirroring, she says. She says that's one of the triggers that adoptive kids can often find themselves facing. Another person writes in this obstacle. This is Mother Maid, who says, no country is my home. That said, if I don't speak in Korean, I feel included here in the U.S. She uses the hashtag disenfranchised. Casper, can you relate to not feeling at home in either your adoptive home or your adopted home?
Yeah, to an extent. There's challenges in both countries. I mean, in some aspects, I feel that a stranger to both countries. Like I'm apart from both Denmark and Korea in certain ways. Like in Denmark, I don't look like the majority of people, but like I am Danish. While in Korea, I look like everybody else, but I don't, you know, I don't think Korean. I don't speak Korean that well either. So yeah, definitely. If I could, I would actually also like to address like an earlier comment by Elizabeth, if that's okay. Just because there was when she said that thing about with institutions, and she wants kids to get away from institutions into other families. Like I understand that, but I think maybe she's also selling institutions short. In that, at least like in my experience, let's say the Danish experience, I mean, Denmark has also had, you know, social deprivation, poverty, single mothers, children living in squalid conditions like 100 years ago. But the solution to that was not like adoption. I mean, it occurred, it existed, but the solution to those issues were, you know, better welfare, better social aid, better social benefits. Like that's the real solution to these issues, in my view. And in the, let's say, the Danish experience is like, you know, improve social conditions. That's how you solve.
Elizabeth?
Can I jump in to agree with that? Because absolutely, I think that that is the solution, is a more just world, a world in which there's more equality. There aren't, you know, right now we have these desperately poor countries, desperately poor people in both poor and rich countries. So I absolutely agree that's the solution. I just don't think it's a solution that no matter how much we would like to achieve it tomorrow, we're going to. So I think there's nothing inconsistent about working for social justice in the long term, but at the same time saying there are millions of children right now living, growing up, and dying in institutions. And for many of them, the only way they will leave those institutions is into an international adoptive home. So when I see the shutdown that is reflected in the figures, the diminishment by 75% coming into the US, I think that's just deliberate denial to kids who could get loving, nurturing homes of what they most need.
Well, first of all, if I can talk about Ethiopia, we call an orphanage Yelich Yetzanet Masadegya. It's supposed to be a place where children are raised, but that is not what is happening. It's just a stop for children before they are actually being sold abroad, often to the West, where there are people who have money and who have power. These children would not be in the orphanage or in these institutions if there was not a demand from the West. So that's a photo of me, by the way, the one smiling, yes. But this is the point. International adoption is demand driven, and that's where the problem is. There is just too much money involved.
I mean, there's a real disagreement about the facts. So there are definitely lots of people who would agree with what you said as being that's the fact. I just profoundly disagree. So I don't think it's demand driven. I think it is largely driven by the fact of desperate, unfair poverty. Of course, there are going to be some instances of what you're talking about, but for the most part, I think there are just way too many poor women in the world who can't afford to raise their kids.
So I want to pull in this perspective. This is Divan, who says, I've always kept an open communication with my daughter's biological family. I think it's very important for the child to do so, but that doesn't always happen. We got this tweet in from Mara. She says, one of my friends, who's an adopted child, says she wants to know about her real parents, but her adopters won't confide in her. Hiran, what was the point that you were made aware that your birth mother was still alive, and how did that process happen?
Well, it's a bit of a long story.
Can you give us the summary of it?
The summary is that my mother temporarily did not have the financial means to take care of me. So she took me to an orphanage as a temporary solution. But within a few months, I was adopted. I stayed also, I just stayed for a few months in the orphanage. So I guess that my point here is that orphans are created on paper just to meet the demand from the West. So that's what's happening here.
And I hear that point, Haran, but can you address the part of the tweet that wants to know about how it should be the onus of the adoptive parents to then help their children if they want to find their biological parents? How did that happen for you?
Well, the mother that adopted me, she was very supportive, and it was actually through a friend of a friend that went to the orphanage where I was from, and they quickly were able to link back to my mother, because I'm from a village not far from the capital here. And I think it's crucial for any child, and it's also in the Convention on the Rights of the Child, to know about your name, your nationality, your background. And what happens is that often files and information is hidden so that children can be orphans on paper and can, be exported through international adoption.
See, Haran and Casper,
if I could just add something.
Yeah, go ahead, Holly. Yeah, Holly, go ahead.
I just want to say a word of caution of us adult adoptees who are in our 20s, 30s, 40s. We often look back at our experiences, and we have to understand that the processes of adoption when we were relinquished were quite different. There was no Hague Convention. There were things that probably, by our standards, would be illegal. I think it's really important, though, to also understand that practices have changed and improved in many cases in international adoption for the better because of pressure to ratify things like the Hague Convention and that sort of thing. So my example is just I had a friend who had adopted from Ethiopia relatively recently, and they were required to meet the biological family. It absolutely blew my mind. And so the ability, I think, for younger people who are adopted today to benefit with connection with biological family is much more viable than it was at the time of my adoption in the 1970s.
See, Holly, you make a good point. Yeah. We're almost at the end of this part of the program, then we'll take all of you to our post show. But you make a good point, because as a team, as we were prepping for this show, we had two images in mind, one from several decades ago and one from contemporary times. Have a look at the one that first came to mind, which is Mia Farrow and her blended family. And then obviously the up-to-date celebrity comparison could be this one with Angelina Jolie and her blended adopted kids from around the world. Attitudes have changed. Elizabeth, what do you feel about that changing attitudes about connecting adopted children more to the country where they were adopted from, maybe their language, going back home a lot? How do you feel about that?
I think it's complicated. I think adoptees should absolutely have a right to access the information about their birth family. I think that it should be up to them whether they want to explore, whether they want to meet the birth family. I don't think we should assume that all adoptees do or should, and I don't think we should put pressure on them, but I definitely think we should keep the records, and I think adoptive parents should feel an obligation to explore what their children want and to facilitate the children getting the information if they can. I think one problem with international adoption is a lot of the countries from which these kids come don't make it easy to, don't keep the information, don't make it easy for kids to trace their birth parents. So I think that would be something to fix. I do think it's good that today's world, just as Holly was saying, it is very different, and adoption agencies today, as a general matter in this country, I think emphasize a lot that adoptive parents should think about their children's heritage and facilitate the children exploring that heritage if the children want to.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for your insight. And Holly and Casper and Haran, we're taking you online. But first, one more comment from our community.
Closing thoughts from Nam on how to do this process better. She says involve the birth parents, offer educated counseling and advice for all parties, and then remove money from that equation.
Do you have a take you'd like to share? Hashtag AJStream, and then meet us online, stream.outofzero.com. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you soon. Hello everybody, we are talking about international adoption and the debate that is around it, how it can be made better, and adoptees' insight, and also insight from an adoptive parent as well. Let me show you this, everybody. You might not be able to see exactly the numbers, but along here is from 2004 to 2013, and then we have Guatemala, Russia, China. These are adoptions, international adoptions into the US, and you can see the numbers there, and every single line drops pretty dramatically, and that's the number of children adopted from all of these countries. Haiti's right there down at the bottom, from all of these countries into towards the United States. So, Elizabeth, is that a good thing or a bad thing? It almost looks like there's an attempt to phase out international adoptions altogether.
So I think it's a terrible thing, and it's absolutely because there is an attempt to phase out international adoption. There are a lot of forces out there that think international adoption is a bad thing and should be stopped. So UNICEF, Save the Children, lots of international NGOs like that oppose international adoption. Our own Department of State in the United States appears to be quite significantly opposed to international adoption and doing its best to create ever more barriers.
That's quite a hefty list of organisations who are against international adoption. Does that not make you think maybe they're onto something here, or does that make you think what's wrong with them?
Absolutely not. I think they have some vested interest in doing in-country programs. I don't think it has anything to do with the best interest of children. If you look at the science, which we haven't talked about much yet, but there is science on how destructive institutions are for kids. There's science on how much kids need nurturing in order to flourish. And that, you know, there's also, there's difference on the facts as to how many kids there are in need of nurturing homes, in genuine need. But I think the true facts are there are millions on millions.
Care of children, like including the extended family, including grandparents. And often, again, as I said, there are many researches done here where in the majority of the cases, the facts on paper are not the reality, are not the truth. So these children are not real orphans, the ones who are in the orphanages. That's my issue with international adoption. It's not the real orphans which are being adopted. Often, in many cases, even the parents are not poor. There are other issues here at stake. It could be taboo of having children outside of marriage, for example. These are other social issues that should be addressed instead of these children leaving the country and having to deal with other issues like identity crisis, or they might face abuse. This is possible anywhere. I get your point on that. But let's look first into the options of having solutions within the country of origin.
So Heron, when you talk about those solutions, in-country solutions, where to start? That's the question people online are asking. This is Grace. She says, the Hague Convention was a good start, but it lacks any teeth. Intent does not equal outcome. So someone else pushes us along a little bit further. This is Danielle. She says, what needs to happen is that these women who are giving birth need to have better rights. Agencies then need to be held accountable for negating those rights if that indeed happens. Heron, do you think that that is the first step in this?
The importance here is that often birth mothers are vulnerable, and especially if they are from a poor financial background. So what should be done here is supporting those mothers. Instead of taking children away from people who are already poor, and then also taking their children away when those children have the basic right to be with their parents.
This is...
So if I could add something.
Yeah, Holly, go ahead.
So I was really engaged in all of these issues during my year and a half in Korea, looking and trying to understand how kids got into orphanage care in a nation that has one of the 13th largest economy. Part of the problem is that a lot of Korea's money does not go into social services. And so especially in prevention research, we have a metaphor of a waterfall. And so At the bottom of the waterfall, all these people are falling in and people are trying to pull them out. And finally, some person gets up and runs and they're saying, where are you going? There's all these people that are drowning at the bottom of the waterfall. And they said, I'm going to go up to the top and find out why people are falling in. And so I think the problem is that we have a need to prevent children from having to enter into an institution, which would be providing more supports to families so that they can take care of them in times of crisis or divorce or poverty. But on the other hand, we have children who've already fallen into the river and are off the cliff, and they're in an orphanage. And what do we do for them to make sure that they have opportunities to maximize as well? And so my example is that in Korea, there isn't a great infrastructure to have children return to their families safely, especially if there has been substantiated abuse. The other problem is the majority of the kids actually in Korea, because they passed a law that a child can only be adopted if somebody can write relinquishing papers. So the vast majority of children in those orphanages, their parents' rights have not been terminated, so none of them are adoptable. And I think that's kind of an example of where international adoption then is not helping the kids who could most benefit, who are these children in institutions. And on the other hand, is only helping a smaller group of children. In the case of Korea, it's predominantly single mothers who relinquish their child because they actually can write the papers to relinquish it.
So I hear what you're saying there. Here's another suggestion. This is Mariette. She says adoption should be an option after family preservation, which is, Haran, the point you were making a little bit earlier. Mariette also goes on to say support the mothers. Take that $50,000 in agency fees and support mothers and families. Haran, do you want to jump in?
I just totally agree with that. Yes.
We could also say let's stop letting obstetricians be charged for natural childbirth and just take that money and give it to poor mothers. But it's not going to happen. You're not going to get $50,000 from, tens of thousands of potential parents and just get them to give the money.
Casper, Haran, let me just have a chat with Casper. Haran, hold tight for a moment. Casper, what did you want to add? What are we missing?
Probably quite a few things, but I mean, to me, one of the striking things about these debates is also how there's this almost like instinctive assumption that children from third world countries, or whatever, will be better off in Europe or in America, almost under any circumstances. Like there's this, I don't know, this sort of privileged assumption that these children will just automatically have a better life by coming to Europe and America, and I think that can be challenged. If you have, if you can help improve conditions in their home countries, in their third countries, why shouldn't that be the better solution, the more optimal solution? Well, that is, after all, that has been the case in Europe and America itself. Nobody's suggesting that we should adopt children from Denmark to other countries. If adoption is such a good solution to these problems, then why aren't Western countries practicing it?
I guess I'm just not sure who indulges in the assumption you're talking about. I think virtually everybody who believes in international adoption thinks that we should emphasize family preservation, we should create child welfare in these countries, we should help poor birth mothers keep their kids. It's a question of what do we do when there are millions of children who've been abandoned, some have no parents at all, some do have a biological parent who will
I hear your Guess, and Haran, and Casper, and Elizabeth, and Holly. Just give me a moment. I hear your position is very clear now, because we've been talking about this for about 40 minutes, so I hear where you're all coming from. Just as a wrap-up, and just very briefly, and don't debate with each other on this, because I'm asking you from your personal perspective. Holly, any regrets about your family and your adoptive history?
No. Absolutely, international adoption makes things complicated. Adoption means more. It means more family, it means perhaps more problems, but it's also an opportunity. And I think for me, in starting an organization called Also Known As, it was really about saying, what do we do with the lives we've been given? Yes, we can complain about everything that shouldn't have happened, but not everyone gets to be adopted internationally. Not everyone gets to have two families. And so what can we say about what's possible about the human spirit? And I think one of the things that I strongly believe is that adoption means that we can love across borders and across races, but it means that we have to work really hard to make them work well.
All right, we were almost out of time here, Elizabeth, but Elizabeth, any regrets about your choices that you made to adopt children from another country?
Of course not. I mean, I two wonderful children came into my family, and I'm incredibly lucky to have been their parent.
Casper?
Like if I have any regrets being adopted, or
yeah, did you ever think when you were a youngster, if only I was the same as everybody else?
Well, to an extent, but it's not. I mean, I don't know. It's not something I got a choice about. Like, I didn't get a choice about being adopted or not. I just have a choice about what I want to do after. You know, what I want to make of my life and the experiences I've had. Like, and I'm fine with that. But I don't really know if I can have an opinion on something I didn't get a choice in.
Yeah, that's a good point. Haran?
I count my blessings. I do. At the same time, I think it's important to base everything in truth. So when children are not orphans, there is no need for them to be adopted.
Okay. Thank you very much for sharing all your perspectives. I can hear the passion in this debate. I won't be going away anytime soon. Malika Bilal, what do we have to end with?
People sharing their personal stories. Thank you so much, because I know it's not always easy. People are telling us, but we appreciate it.
Thanks for watching the stream. See you soon.